Hello and welcome back to Sleepy History Podcast. Tonight, you're somewhere on the cattle trails of the American West in the decades after the Civil War, when thousands of longhorn cattle are being pushed north toward railheads in Kansas. The sun has gone, the ground is hard, your breath is beginning to show in the dark, and the warmth you built up during a day in the saddle is disappearing much faster than you'd like. Your problem is simple enough to describe. You need to sleep outdoors in freezing weather, beside a fire that is much smaller and less reliable than the campfires in old Western paintings. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. You swing down from the saddle with legs that have spent most of the day bent around a horse. For a moment, standing feels slightly unnatural. Your knees complain. Your back has opinions. The cattle are settling beyond the firelight, hundreds of dark bodies shifting and breathing, reminding everyone that a quiet herd can change quickly. Before you think about blankets, you think about the ground. That sounds unromantic, which is probably why Western films rarely spend much time on it. But the ground is where a great deal of your body heat is about to go. If the soil is wet, frozen, or exposed to wind, lying directly on it is miserable. Your fire can warm your face and hands, but it cannot stop the earth beneath you from pulling warmth away through direct contact. A cowboy who simply drops a blanket onto cold mud has created a very thin agreement with winter. And winter has not signed it. So you look for the least bad patch of earth. Dry ground is better than damp ground. A slight rise may be better than a hollow where cold air or water collects. Some shelter from the wind helps. Nearby fuel helps too, because a beautiful campsite without anything to burn becomes less beautiful after dark. There is another complication. You cannot wander miles away looking for the perfect sleeping place. The herd determines where the outfit stops. Water matters. Grass matters. The condition of the cattle matters. The day's distance matters. The trail boss is not organizing a camping holiday. Camp is part of the cattle-moving system. On many drives, the chuck wagon becomes the practical center of that camp. It carries food, cookware, supplies, and often bedding or personal gear. Men come in from the herd, eat, tend horses and equipment, and take whatever rest the night schedule allows. The cook's fire may provide the brightest fixed point in the darkness, but nobody should imagine every cowboy arranged neatly around it, like spokes around a glowing wheel. Some men are still working. The herd usually needs a night guard. Cattle that have walked all day may settle, but noises, weather, predators, lightning, or sudden panic can disturb them. Riders take turns watching them. That means your sleeping arrangement is temporary from the beginning. You may have only a few hours before somebody wakes you for your watch. This changes what bed means. You are not constructing comfort. You are reducing heat loss enough to get useful sleep before you have to move again. Your first useful object is often whatever can separate you from the soil. Depending on period, outfit, weather, and what a man owns, this might involve a tarpaulin, canvas, saddle blanket, extra blanket, coat, or the outer layer of a bedroll. Trail equipment varied. There was no single sleeping kit carried by every rider, but the basic physics did not change. Something beneath you is better than nothing beneath you. Then come the blankets. Wool is valuable because it traps insulating air and can still offer some protection when damp. Wet bedding is still bad bedding. A soaked blanket becomes heavier, colder, slower to dry, and considerably less pleasant when the temperature drops. Canvas can help protect the bedding from dirt, dew, wind, and moisture, especially when wrapped into a bedroll. The point is not that a layer of canvas somehow makes the prairie warm. It does not. The point is that survival in cold conditions often depends on many small reductions in heat loss rather than one dramatic source of warmth. A little less wind, a little less moisture, a little more trapped air, a little insulation from the ground, a fire that keeps burning, enough food inside you to keep producing heat. None of those things looks heroic. Together, they matter. You unroll what you have and sit near the fire. Now you notice another small problem. The side of your body facing the flames feels almost comfortable. The side facing the night does not. A campfire warms you mainly through radiant heat. You can feel that radiation on exposed skin even when the surrounding air remains bitterly cold. Turn your back to the flames and your coat begins receiving the heat instead. Your face cools. Turn again and the process reverses. This is why the phrase, sleeping beside a warm fire, is a little misleading. The fire is warm. The night is still cold. You can move closer, but only so close. Sparks rise. Wind shifts. Wool resists flame better than some materials, but it is not magic. Canvas can scorch. Boots can dry too aggressively and suffer for it. Blankets can pick up embers. Smoke can suddenly choose your exact sleeping position with the determination of a creature that has been personally offended by you. And a larger fire needs more fuel? That matters on cattle country where wood may be plentiful in one place and frustratingly scarce in another. Along treeless stretches of the plains, travellers and trail crews could use dried buffalo dung, often called buffalo chips, where it was available. It burns, it cooks food, it provides heat. It also removes some of the cinematic elegance from the phrase, gathering firewood. History is often like that. The practical solution is usually less photogenic than the legend. By now, the camp has gone quieter. Tin utensils have been put away. Horses shift on their ropes or in the remuda. Someone near the herd may be singing softly, partly out of habit and partly because a calm human voice can help keep cattle accustomed to the riders moving around them in darkness. You lower yourself onto your bedding. Your muscles finally stop holding you upright. For perhaps 30 seconds, this feels excellent. Then your shoulder finds a stone. You move it. Your hip discovers the ground underneath the blanket is colder than expected. You fold part of the bedding. The wind touches the back of your neck. You pull your coat higher. This is the first important correction to the familiar cowboy image. The bedroll and campfire are not symbols of effortless freedom when the temperature falls. They are pieces of a working thermal system, and each piece has limits. The ground steals heat. The wind carries it away. Moisture weakens insulation. The fire warms only part of you. Fuel disappears as it burns. And your own body is already tired from a day of riding, roping, dust, cold, and constant small adjustments in the saddle. So the smartest thing you can do tonight begins before you lie down. You choose the ground carefully, because if you start the night in the wrong place, no amount of romantic firelight is going to make the next few hours easy. The first campsite that looks comfortable is not always the one you choose. By late afternoon, the herd has already made most of the decision for you. The cattle need grass. They need access to water somewhere along the route. They need enough open ground to settle without being crowded into a place where a small disturbance could turn into confusion. The trail boss is thinking about tomorrow before tonight has even begun. You are thinking about the wind. It has followed you for hours. On horseback. Wind is annoying. After dark. When you stop moving and your body stops producing quite so much heat, it becomes something more serious. Moving air strips warmth from exposed skin and from the outer surface of your clothes. The stronger the wind, the faster that heat disappears. A fire helps, but a fire in open country can only do so much if cold air is constantly moving across your body. So before anyone unrolls a blanket, you look around. A shallow creek bank may offer some shelter. A line of brush can break the wind. A low rise might keep you away from damp ground, although the top of that rise could leave you exposed to every gust crossing the plains. A hollow may look protected, but hollows can collect cold air, moisture, and water after rain. There is rarely a perfect choice. You are selecting the place with the fewest problems. That is a useful way to understand almost everything about sleeping on a cattle drive. Not comfortable. Less uncomfortable. Not warm. Warmer. Not safe from weather. Better protected from one part of it. The cattle themselves limit how far you can go. A cowboy cannot decide that the best sleeping place is half a mile away, behind a beautiful windbreak, if his job requires him to be close enough to hear trouble in the herd. Sound matters at night. During daylight you can see cattle spread across the landscape. After dark, much of your information arrives through your ears. Hooves shifting, horns knocking, a horse snorting, a sudden change in the low murmur of resting animals. A quiet herd has a sound. So does a nervous one. You want to be close enough that changes in that sound reach camp quickly. This is one reason a cattle drive campsite is not just a sleeping site, it is a work position. The herd is the reason you are here. The herd remains the reason for almost every compromise you make. Now there is water. Water sounds like an obvious advantage, and it is. Men and animals need it, the cook needs it, but sleeping directly beside a water source can create its own problems. The ground may be damp. Cold moisture settles on blankets. Mud clings to boots. A creek bottom may funnel cold air. If livestock have churned the bank all evening, the most convenient patch of earth may also be a mixture of mud, hoof prints, manure, and things you would rather not inspect too carefully in the dark. So you move a little farther. Not far, just enough. You test the ground with your boot. Firm? Dry enough? There are fewer stones here. The wind is partly blocked by the bank. That is already a better bed than the open prairie 20 yards away. Then someone has to think about fuel. A camp near trees makes this easier. Dead branches can be gathered. Along river corridors, cottonwood and other available wood may provide what the outfit needs. But cattle trails cross long stretches where large timber is not conveniently waiting beside every camp. Fuel has weight. You cannot carry unlimited firewood on a wagon that already has food, cookware, tools, supplies, and the possessions needed to keep a moving outfit functioning. So landscape decides again. If wood is nearby, someone gathers it before darkness settles fully. That timing matters. Trying to find fuel after the temperature has dropped, after men have eaten, and after everyone is tired is a poor system. The useful work happens while there is still enough light to see what you are picking up. Dry wood burns better. Wet wood smokes. Green wood can be stubborn. Small pieces catch quickly, but disappear quickly. Larger pieces last longer, but may need a stronger fire before they burn well. Nothing here requires sophisticated theory. You learn it because a bad fire means a colder night. And if the country offers little wood, you adapt. On parts of the Great Plains, dried buffalo dung had long served as fuel for travelers and settlers. It was light when dry, could be gathered from the ground, and would burn where timber was scarce. You do not need to admire it. You only need it to work. That small distinction separates practical history from frontier mythology. A cowboy does not survive because every object around him is noble. He survives because enough ordinary objects do useful things. Now the chuck wagon stops. The cook wants reasonably level ground too. Pots behave better when they are not leaning downhill. Supplies need to remain accessible. Horses and cattle should not be trampling through the cooking area. Camp begins arranging itself around these needs. There may be no formal diagram. There does not have to be. Experience creates patterns. Fire here. Wagon here. Bedrolls nearby but not in the way. Horses managed where they can be reached. Herd beyond. Night riders moving between darkness and camp. The location you chose 15 minutes earlier begins affecting everything. A little protection from the wind makes the fire easier to maintain. A drier surface keeps bedding from absorbing moisture from below. Nearby fuel means fewer trips into the dark. Enough distance from the herd reduces the chance of being directly in its path if cattle shift. Close enough means men can respond quickly. Every advantage is small. Together they make the night manageable. You sit on your heels and clear a few stones from where your shoulders will be. This is not a dramatic act. No one writes songs about removing stones before bedtime. You do it anyway. A branch under your ribs becomes surprisingly important at 2 in the morning. So does the slope. If your head is downhill, you notice. If your bedroll slowly slides toward the fire, you definitely notice. If melting frost, rain, or runoff reaches your bedding, you notice for the rest of the night. The cowboys who have been on the trail longer tend to see these problems earlier. That is part of what experience means. It is not simply becoming tougher. It is becoming harder to surprise. You notice where water would run. You notice which direction the smoke is moving. You notice whether the wind is likely to strengthen. You notice that the inviting patch of grass is actually damp underneath. You notice a dead limb overhead before choosing to sleep below it. You notice where the horses are tied. You notice where men will walk in the dark. You notice the route between the herd and the fire. Then you place your bedding where fewer things are likely to go wrong. That sounds almost boring. It should. Much of survival is the removal of boring little mistakes. The fire can only warm the campsite you give it. Blankets can only insulate you from the ground you lie on. Dry clothing only stays dry if you do not place it in wet grass. And good sleep is difficult enough without spending half the night correcting a bad decision made before sunset. The air is colder now. Your breath is easier to see. The cook's fire is beginning to glow steadily, and someone returns, carrying another armful of fuel. You have found a patch of earth that is dry, partly sheltered, close enough to the herd, and close enough to the fire. It is not much, but before the blankets, before the coat pulled around your shoulders, before the first cup of hot coffee in the morning, this small choice has already saved you heat. Now you need to keep that fire alive long enough for it to matter. By the time the last usable light disappears, the fire has become more than a place to cook. It is now part of your bed. Not literally, you are not going to crawl into it, although after another hour of cold that idea may briefly seem worth considering. The fire is the heat source around which everything else has to work. Your blankets, your coat, the ground beneath you, the wind, and the fuel close enough to reach in the dark. The mistake would be to build the biggest fire you can. A huge blaze looks impressive. It throws heat far across camp. It also eats fuel quickly. That matters because no one wants to spend the entire night gathering wood. The useful fire is the one you can maintain. You start small. Dry grass, shavings, bark, twigs, or whatever fine dry material is available catches first. Then come sticks, then larger pieces of wood if you have them. The principle is simple. A flame needs something easy to ignite before it can heat larger fuel enough to keep burning. If you throw a heavy log onto a weak flame too soon, you may smother the whole arrangement. Then you are crouching over smoke, blowing into embers, while everyone else watches with the special patience reserved for a man who has just made bedtime colder. Once the fire is established, the question changes. How long will it last? Small sticks give quick heat. Larger wood burns more slowly. If the fuel is damp, part of the fire's energy goes into driving out moisture before the wood burns well. That means more smoke, less useful heat, and more attention. Dry fuel is easier. On a cold cattle drive, you use what the country gives you. Along wooded streams, that might mean dead branches gathered nearby. In brush country, smaller woody fuel may be available. Across open stretches of the plains, dried buffalo chips could serve when timber was scarce. It only needs to make enough heat for cooking and camp use. You begin to understand why experienced trail hands pay attention to fuel before darkness. A pile beside the fire is stored warmth. Not much warmth, but measurable in the only way that matters tonight. You do not have to leave your blankets as often. The fire settles into a bed of glowing coals. That is useful. Flames are dramatic. But coals matter because they hold and release heat more steadily. A fire with a good coal bed is easier to revive. Push the pieces together, give them air, place fresh fuel on top, and the flame can return. Spread them too far apart and the fire weakens. Bury them under too much fuel and it may struggle. Leave them completely unattended and eventually you wake to darkness. This is where sleeping by the campfire becomes slightly misleading again. The campfire does not promise to stay awake because you are tired. Someone has to manage it. Sometimes a man who wakes naturally adds fuel. Sometimes a cowboy returning from night herd duty stirs the coals. Sometimes the cook is awake before many of the others and brings the fire back for breakfast. The need is constant. Fire consumes fuel, so warmth has to be renewed. You lie down and test the distance. Closer feels better immediately. Your face warms. Your hands warm. The front of your coat warms. Then a small ember snaps from the fire and lands several feet away. You notice that the safest sleeping distance depends on the size of the fire, the wind, the fuel, and what is lying around you. Too far away and the radiant heat becomes weak. Too close and sparks become a real problem. Smoke adds another lesson. For 10 quiet minutes, it drifts away from you. Then the wind turns. Now the smoke crosses your bedroll. Your eyes sting. You move. 5 minutes later, it follows. This has given generations of campers the suspicion that smoke has personal motives. Warm air rises above the fire, nearby air moves in to replace it, and wind shifts the plume. You are simply lying in a place where small changes become very noticeable. The cold makes those changes matter more. If you move farther from the smoke, you may also move farther from the heat. If you move to the other side of the fire, you may expose yourself to more wind. Every improvement creates another little calculation. Radiant heat travels outward from the flames and coals. The side of you facing the fire receives more of it. Your other side depends on trapped body heat inside clothing and bedding. So you turn one shoulder toward the fire, then your back, then the other shoulder. You are not roasting evenly. You are negotiating. A bank, rock face, wagon side, or other barrier may reduce wind or return some heat toward camp, depending on the site, but on an open cattle trail, you cannot count on finding a perfect natural fireplace every evening. Most nights are more ordinary than that. A fire, open air, blankets, a tired man trying to find the least uncomfortable angle. You pull your hat lower and think about your boots. Wet footwear needs drying, but placing leather too close to strong heat can be hard on it. Rapid drying may stiffen leather or damage it. Boots are working equipment. You cannot casually ruin them because your toes are cold tonight. So you warm and dry things carefully. Socks, a damp coat, a blanket edge that picked up moisture. You use the fire as a tool, not just a heater. That distinction matters. The same flames that warm you, cook food, heat coffee, dry clothing, provide light, and help make camp workable after sunset. In cold weather, losing the fire means losing several functions at once. But keeping it alive costs labor. Every piece of fuel had to be gathered. Every armful took time. Every trip away from camp used energy from a body already working hard. If wood is scarce, you cannot casually burn through your supply just to make the night look brighter. The fire becomes an economy. Heat in exchange for fuel, light in exchange for fuel, dry clothing in exchange for fuel, hot food in exchange for fuel. And the price rises whenever the landscape gives you less to burn. This is why a modest fire can make more sense than a roaring one. You want enough heat to matter. enough coals to survive between feedings, enough fuel left for later, enough distance that your bedding stays safe. The ideal is not maximum flame. It is controlled usefulness. By now the first men assigned to the night herd are already away from camp. The rest of you settle down. The fire is lower than it was during supper. The bright flames have mostly collapsed into red-orange coals with occasional tongues of light where fresh fuel catches. From your bedroll, you can feel the difference immediately. Less glare, less heat, more cold around the edges. You pull the blanket tighter. Someone reaches out with a boot and nudges a burning piece inward. Another man adds a chunk of wood. The coals brighten. For a little while, the warmth returns. That is the rhythm of the night. Burn. Fade. Feed. Warm. Fade again. No endless bonfire. No effortless sleep. Just a small, controlled source of heat that works only as long as fuel, attention, and weather allow it to work. And tonight, even that is not the whole problem. Because the fire warms you from the side. The frozen ground is still directly underneath you. The fire is doing its job. Your back is still cold. That is because one of the most important parts of sleeping outdoors has almost nothing to do with the flames beside you. It is the layer underneath you. You lower your weight onto the bedroll and immediately feel the truth of it. The ground is hard, dense, and much colder than the air trapped inside your clothing. Whatever warmth your body produces begins moving toward that colder surface. This is conduction. You do not need the word to understand the problem. Lie directly on cold earth long enough, and the earth wins. A campfire can warm your face from several feet away, but it cannot reach efficiently through your entire body and replace all the heat you are losing into the ground beneath your shoulders, hips, and back. So what you sleep on matters a lot. The popular picture of a cowboy bedroll usually shows a neat bundle tied behind the saddle, ready to open into something halfway between a blanket and a portable bedroom. Real sleeping gear varied. A cowboy might have wool blankets, a tarpaulin or canvas sheet, a coat, saddle blankets, or some combination of whatever the outfit and the individual man carried. Some cattle drive equipment traveled with the chuck wagon rather than remaining strapped to a saddle all day. Wealth, distance, season, habit, and the rules of a particular outfit all changed the details. There is no single universal cowboy bed, but the need underneath it remains the same. You want separation from the ground. Even a modest barrier helps. Canvas alone is not thick insulation, but it can keep blankets cleaner and drier and reduce direct contact with damp soil. Folded blankets add trapped air. Extra clothing can add another layer. Grass, where suitable and dry, may soften and slightly insulate a sleeping place if someone chooses to use it. The goal is not softness for its own sake. Softness is nice. Insulation is useful. Those are not exactly the same thing. A deep feather mattress would be wonderfully soft and also completely absurd to transport behind a moving cattle herd. Everything on the trail has to justify its weight and bulk. That is why portable bedding becomes a compromise between warmth, durability, and the amount of material a man or wagon can reasonably carry. You spread your outer layer first. It keeps the better blankets away from dirt. You arrange what padding you have where your body will put the most pressure. Shoulders, hips, perhaps your coat under part of you if you can spare it. Then you lie down again. Better? Not good. Better. That difference is the entire system. The cold ground is still there. You have simply slowed the transfer of heat. Now consider the saddle. During the day, it is the center of your working life. At night, parts of your riding gear can become useful around camp. Though you treat expensive or essential equipment carefully, a saddle is not something you casually expose to sparks, rain, or damage. A saddle blanket, depending on its condition and use, can provide material that is already designed to sit between surfaces and handle hard treatment. Your gear is not divided neatly into day objects and night objects. On the trail, things often perform more than one job. A coat is clothing until it becomes bedding. A tarp protects gear until it becomes part of a sleeping arrangement. A rolled blanket is luggage until darkness turns it into insulation. Your hat is a sunshade all afternoon and then gets pulled down against cold air at night. Practical objects earn their place by being useful repeatedly. You shift again. There is still a stone under your ribs. You find it with your hand, pull it free, and throw it into the darkness. One less problem. Now your hip feels the harder soil beneath the thin padding. That point matters because your body compresses whatever insulation is under it. Insulation works partly by trapping still air. When you squash the material flat beneath your weight, there is less trapped air available to slow heat loss. This is one reason the bottom of a sleeping system can feel colder than the top, even when you have the same amount of material nearby. The blankets over you stay relatively lofted. The blankets beneath you are crushed. Your body notices. Modern sleeping pads solve this very efficiently. You do not have a modern sleeping pad. You have cloth, canvas, perhaps dry vegetation, your clothing, and experience. So you arrange them carefully. The men who have done this for years do not necessarily talk about conductive heat loss. They know what cold ground does because they have spent nights on it. That kind of knowledge becomes physical. You test a campsite with your boot. You avoid obvious dampness. You clear stones before lying down. You keep your better bedding dry. You fold material where you need it. You know that losing one blanket underneath you may be worse than it first appears, even if putting every blanket on top feels more natural. You learn because discomfort teaches quickly. Cold teaches faster. Now frost begins forming on exposed surfaces. The grass beyond camp takes on a pale edge. Your bedding is close enough to the earth that moisture matters again. If the outer canvas becomes damp, that is irritating. If your insulating layers become wet, the problem grows. Moisture allows heat to move more easily than trapped dry air. Wet materials can also become heavy and difficult to dry in freezing conditions. So a bedroll is doing several jobs at once. It keeps material together. It protects some bedding during transport. At night it becomes a layered barrier against dirt, wind, dew and cold ground. Then morning comes and the same system has to be packed again. That last part matters. You are not building a permanent bed. Everything has to disappear. The herd will move. The wagon will move. The horses will move. You will move. A sleeping system that takes hours to construct would be useless on a cattle drive. You need something that can be opened after work, slept in, rolled up, loaded, and carried to the next camp. Mobility shapes comfort. That is easy to forget when looking backward from a modern bedroom. Your own bed probably exists for one purpose. It stays in one room. It does not need to cross rivers. It does not need to survive mud. It does not need to fit into a wagon. Nobody expects you to roll it up before breakfast because 2,000 cattle are already beginning to move north. For you tonight, every layer has to remain portable. That is why there is no single magical object keeping you warm. The system is additive. Dry ground, canvas, blankets, clothing, your own body heat, the campfire at your side. If one part gets worse, another part has to work harder. Cold ground means more insulation. Less insulation means greater dependence on the fire. Weak fire means greater dependence on clothing and blankets. Wet blankets make everything worse at once. By midnight, you no longer think of the bedroll as a simple bundle. It is your floor, your mattress, your insulation, your cover, your protection from damp soil, your small portable boundary between a warm human body and a landscape that does not care whether you sleep comfortably. You pull one layer tighter around your shoulder. The ground beneath you still feels firm, but the sharp cold has softened. The fire throws a low orange light across the canvas. For the first time since lying down, you feel like you might actually sleep. Then the wind moves again. The upper blanket lifts slightly at the edge. Cold air slides underneath. You grab it and tuck it back against your body. Now the next part of the problem becomes obvious. The layer beneath you matters, but so does every layer wrapped around you. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. For a moment, the cold retreats. Then you move your knee. The edge lifts, and a narrow strip of night air slides underneath. That tiny draft is enough to wake you. This is the next lesson. A blanket is not just something heavy placed on top of you. It only works well if it keeps a layer of relatively still air close to your body. Your body produces the heat. The blanket slows its escape. That distinction matters because a cowboy on a freezing cattle drive is not being heated mainly by the wool wrapped around him. Wool does not create warmth. Neither does canvas. Neither does a coat. You are the furnace. Everything else is trying to stop that furnace from losing heat too quickly, which means the clothing you wore all day becomes part of the sleeping system. You do not necessarily undress the way you would in a bedroom. Why would you? The air is cold. Your clothes are already layers. A shirt, perhaps a vest, trousers, a coat or heavy outer garment when the weather requires it. Woolen garments, where available, are especially useful because wool fibers trap air and continue to provide insulation even when they are not perfectly dry. Again, that does not mean wet wool is pleasant. It means wet wool is generally less disastrous than some alternatives. Dry remains the goal. You begin with what is already on your body. That has another advantage. If the herd suddenly moves, if your night watch begins, or if something goes wrong, you do not want to spend several minutes rebuilding yourself from a pile of clothing scattered around the fire. Trail sleep is never completely separated from trail work. You may be resting. You are still on duty, so you keep important layers close. Boots remain nearby. Hat nearby. Coat either on you or immediately available. Nothing essential should require a search in darkness. Now you arrange the bedding around those clothes. A wool blanket works because of all the little spaces inside its fibers and weave. Those spaces trap air. Air that is not moving much does not carry your body heat away as quickly as open cold air does. Add another blanket and you add another layer of trapped air. Fold one blanket over itself and the insulation increases in that area. Wrap the edges around your body and you reduce drafts. The logic is very simple. More dry trapped air usually means less rapid heat loss. But there are limits. Too little covering and heat escapes. Too much tight compression can flatten the material and reduce some of the insulating air, and any opening that allows wind to pump cold air through your bedding makes the whole arrangement less effective. This is why the shape matters. You do not simply throw a blanket over yourself and hope. You tuck it, you overlap edges, you curl slightly if that helps reduce exposed surface area. You may pull your coat collar higher around your neck. Your hat can stay on. That last detail matters more than it seems. Your head is not a magical chimney that loses most of your body heat, as an old popular claim sometimes suggests. Heat loss depends on what part of your body is exposed and how well it is insulated. But an uncovered head in cold wind still loses heat. So you cover it. Simple. Your hat has already spent the day blocking sun, dust, rain, and glare. Now it becomes part of the nighttime insulation. You pull it lower. The brim shades your eyes from the fire. Your ears are less happy. If you have something that can cover them, you use it. A neckerchief, scarf, coat collar, or other cloth can help protect exposed skin depending on what you carry. None of this creates the bulky cocoon of a modern expedition sleeping bag. You are working with ordinary clothing and blankets. The warmth comes from layering. Layering also gives you something important during a variable night. Control. The temperature at sunset is not necessarily the temperature before dawn. Wind can rise. Frost can form. A clear night may become colder as the hours pass. If you have several layers, you can adjust. Blanket over you. Another blanket folded across your torso. Coat on top. Canvas around the outer layer to cut wind. Or, if the fire is stronger and you become too warm on one side, loosen things slightly. That last possibility is easy to ignore. Sweating in cold weather is bad. If you overheat, your clothing becomes damp from inside. Then, when you cool down, that moisture works against you. A cowboy does not need a textbook on cold weather physiology to discover this. Ride hard in too many layers. Sweat. Stop moving. Feel the chill arrive. You remember. So warmth has to be managed, not simply maximized. Dryness keeps returning as the real prize. Your clothes can collect moisture from several directions. Sweat from riding. Rain. Snow. Wet brush. A creek crossing. Damp ground. Condensation and dew. Even the horse can contribute if you spend the day working in wet weather and transferring moisture from tack and animal to clothing. Once camp is made, you inspect what you have. Are your socks damp? Is your coat wet at the shoulders? Did the bottom edge of a blanket touch mud? Can anything be dried safely near the fire before you lie down? You take the opportunity while the flames are still strong. A sock near the fire warms quickly. Too close and it can scorch. A wool garment handles heat differently from leather. Boots require care. Leather can stiffen, shrink, or crack if treated badly. So you do not put valuable working boots against intense heat and forget about them. You rotate damp things. Move them. Feel them. Let warm air do the work. Dry equipment tonight is warmer equipment later. Then there is the outer wrap. Canvas is not especially warm by itself, but used around blankets it can help block wind and protect the softer material inside from frost, dew, dirt, and sparks. Think of it as a shell. Blankets are trying to trap warmth. The outer layer is trying to protect that trapped warmth from the weather. This is the same basic logic found in many cold weather clothing systems. An insulating layer. A protective outer layer. The details change. The principle does not. You lie back down. This time the bedding feels more organized. Canvas beneath. Blankets around. Clothes still on. Coat closed. Hat low. The fire several feet away. You tuck the outer edge beneath your shoulder. Then you feel something you have been waiting for. A stable pocket of warmth. Not hot. Not luxurious. Stable. Your body finally warms the small amount of air inside the layers faster than the night can steal it. That is enough to let your muscles relax. And now another common picture of cowboy life begins to look different. The famous bedroll is not simply a quaint object carried by a wandering man. It is a portable climate, a very crude one. A few layers of wool, canvas, clothing, and air that create a narrow zone where a human body can remain warmer than the landscape around it. The system only works while the layers stay reasonably dry. It only works while wind is controlled. It only works while you have enough food and energy to keep producing heat. And it works best when you do not keep opening it every few minutes. Unfortunately, your job is about to interfere with that last part. Somewhere beyond the orange edge of the firelight, the cattle shift. A rider passes quietly through the darkness. Your watch is not yet. So you stay where you are. You close your eyes. The layer on your fireside grows warmer. The layer facing away cools slightly. For now, the difference is manageable. You finally understand what the blankets are doing. They are not defeating the cold. They are slowing it down. And on a freezing cattle drive, slowing the cold down can be enough to buy you sleep. The fire feels good enough that moving closer seems obvious. You are cold. The flames are warm. There are only a few feet between those two facts. So you inch your bedroll forward. Immediately, the front of your coat feels better. Your hands stop aching. Your face warms. The temptation is to move another few inches. Then a spark jumps. It lands on the dirt near your blanket. You stop. This is the problem with fire. The same thing that protects you from the cold can damage the few objects protecting you from everything else. A campfire does not give heat politely. It throws sparks. It produces smoke. It changes when the wind changes. Wood shifts as it burns. A branch that looks stable can collapse inward. A burning end can roll. Hot coals can pop. You are sleeping beside a moving chemical reaction. That sounds more dramatic than it feels at camp, because most of the time the fire behaves exactly as expected. Cowboys, hunters, soldiers, emigrants, and other people who regularly slept outdoors learned ordinary habits around it. Distance, clear ground, controlled fuel, attention. Those habits matter more than bravery. You do not need to fear the fire. You need to respect what it does. Your blankets are too valuable to scorch. Your coat is too useful to burn. Your boots are essential. And you are not carrying a spare bedroom. If a blanket develops a small burn hole, the problem is not only cosmetic. That hole can grow. It can let more cold air in. It can weaken a piece of equipment you may need for weeks. So you do not put the edge of the bedroll where flying embers are landing. You watch the sparks for a while. Some rise vertically. Others drift with the wind. The farther they travel, the cooler they become. But a glowing ember landing on dry cloth is still something you would rather avoid. The wind direction gives you another clue. If you sleep directly downwind, sparks are not your only problem. Smoke is coming too. At first, smoke is merely irritating. It gets into your eyes, your nose, your throat. It sticks to wool and hair. Everything already smells of horse, leather, dust, sweat, cooking grease, and cattle. Smoke simply adds itself to the collection. But thick smoke near your face is not something you want to breathe all night. So the ideal position is neither too close nor directly in the smoke. Unfortunately, the wind is free to change its mind. You choose one side of the fire. The smoke moves away. Good. You settle down. 10 minutes pass. The wind shifts a little. Now the smoke crosses your feet. That is tolerable. Another shift. It moves toward your head. You cough, pull a blanket over your mouth for a moment, then sit up. Someone across the fire notices. He has probably done this many times before. Nobody is surprised. You drag the bedroll a little farther around the circle. The heat is weaker here, but the air is clearer. This is the first important trade. More heat can mean more smoke. More distance can mean less heat. And moving around the fire may put you on the windward side, where cold air reaches you before it reaches the flames. There is no perfect position. There is only the place where several problems become manageable at the same time. Now the fire burns lower. That changes the safe distance again. A roaring fire throws useful radiant heat farther. A bed of coals does not. You may be comfortable several feet away during supper and noticeably colder in exactly the same place at midnight. So you pull your blankets tighter rather than crawling toward the coals. That is usually the better first adjustment. Your bedding should do most of the work. The fire should help. If the fire has to provide nearly all your warmth, the system is fragile. One gust, one rain shower, one shortage of fuel, one exhausted camp where nobody wants to get up and feed it. Then the heat disappears. Good cold weather sleep relies on layers that keep working when the flames shrink. Still, there is a reason you stay close enough to feel them. Radiant heat is immediate. You can hold your hands toward the fire and feel the effect before the air around camp has warmed much at all. This makes the fire especially useful for exposed areas. Hands after removing gloves. Feet near the edge of the bedroll. A stiff back when you sit up. Clothing that needs drying. It gives you short, targeted warmth. You just do not want to fall asleep with something valuable too near it. Boots are a good example. After a wet or freezing day, warm boots sound wonderful. You set them near the fire. The leather begins to dry. That is useful. Move them too close though, and strong heat can make the leather hard and brittle. Grease and proper care help preserve working leather, but careless drying can still damage it. A cowboy without functioning boots has created a much larger problem than cold toes. So you rotate them, check them, move them back. The same caution applies to other gear. Leather tack, blanket edges, canvas, anything damp enough that you are tempted to put it directly beside the flames. The fire rewards patience. Warm it. Do not cook it. Your socks are easier. You hold them near the heat. Steam may rise if they are damp. You turn them. Now the smell becomes a small historical detail no painting captures very enthusiastically. Several men, long days in the saddle, damp wool, wet leather, smoke, coffee, cattle nearby. The West has a scent. It is not pine-scented candle. You put the socks back on. Warm, much better. Then another log shifts. A cluster of sparks rises. This time you see why clearing the ground around the fire matters. Dry grass close to open flames is an obvious hazard. So a campfire site is generally kept reasonably clear of material that can catch easily. Again, nothing sophisticated here. Remove what burns where you do not want burning. Put fuel where you do. People living around open fires learn this early. The greater danger is complacency. Cold encourages you to move closer. Tiredness encourages you to stop paying attention. A dying fire encourages you to pile on more fuel. Strong wind can make all of those choices worse. The sensible response is not to make the fire enormous. It is to keep the system controlled. A manageable fire. Enough clear earth around it. Bedding placed outside the easiest reach of sparks. Fuel stacked where it is accessible, but not where it can accidentally catch. Clothing drying under observation. Then you can sleep. Or try to. You lie on one side, facing the fire. Your nose is cold. Your cheeks are warm. The front of your body receives radiant heat through the opening of the blankets. After a while, it becomes almost too warm. Your back still feels the night. So you turn. Now your back warms. Your face cools. That unevenness is going to follow you for hours. A campfire is directional. It heats whichever side faces it most effectively. Your blankets soften the difference, but they do not erase it. You begin rotating without fully waking. Front, back, side, tuck the blanket, shift a shoulder, pull your feet in. The movement becomes almost automatic. This is not the deep, motionless sleep of a warm bedroom. It is sleep interrupted by small corrections. And that may be the most useful way to understand a freezing night beside a cattle drive fire. You are never completely surrendering control. Part of you is listening. Part of you notices the heat changing. Part of you notices smoke. Part of you notices when the blanket edge opens. Part of you notices when the fire drops low. You rest inside a system that needs occasional adjustment. Beyond the flames, the cattle are dark shapes under the cold sky. Someone is still riding the herd. You are warm enough, far enough from sparks, out of the worst smoke, wrapped tightly. For now, the balance works. Then you turn again, because the side facing away from the fire has gone cold. And now the real rhythm of sleeping beside those flames begins. You turn again, not because you are fully awake. Your body simply notices that one side is getting colder. That is what sleeping beside a fire is actually like on a freezing night. The heat is real, but it does not surround you evenly. It comes from one direction. The side facing the flames warms first. Your coat absorbs some of that heat. Your cheek feels it. Your hands feel it if they are outside the blankets. Meanwhile, the other side of your body faces open night. Cold air, dark ground, wind, no glowing coals. So after a while, you rotate. Your warm side turns away. Your cold side moves toward the fire. For a few minutes, the change feels wonderful. Then the same imbalance slowly begins again. This movement can happen over and over through the night. Half asleep, turn, pull the blanket, tuck the edge, move one knee, shift your shoulder away from a stone, turn again. The fire does not need to go out for you to feel cold. It only needs to be on the wrong side of you. This is one reason old descriptions of men sleeping beside campfires can sound more comfortable than the reality probably felt. Yes, the fire provides heat. But radiant heat works mainly along a line between the source and whatever faces it. Your blankets trap some of the warmth and spread the benefit, but they cannot make the whole environment the same temperature. If your back faces the fire, your back gets the strongest radiant heating. Your chest does not. If your feet are close but your shoulders are farther away, your lower body may feel noticeably warmer than your upper body. If the wind hits from behind, your blanket can lose heat almost as quickly as the fire replaces it. So you keep adjusting. Experienced sleepers learn where to position themselves. Not so close that sparks become dangerous. Not so far that the fire becomes mostly decorative. Not directly in smoke. Not with the strongest wind blowing straight across the bedroll. And ideally with some barrier behind them. A wagon. A creek bank. A low ridge. Brush. Even a small reduction in moving air can make the fire feel stronger because less of the warmth around your body is being carried away. You begin to understand why campsite choice from earlier in the evening mattered so much. The fire has not changed. Your exposure has. A small windbreak can make a modest fire useful. A bad position can make a larger fire feel surprisingly weak. The coldest time often comes later. Near sunset, the earth is still giving back some of the heat it absorbed during the day. As night continues, that stored warmth fades. Under a clear sky, surfaces can cool rapidly. Before dawn, camp may feel colder than it did when you first lay down. So the system that worked at 9 in the evening may need help at 3 in the morning. You wake enough to notice your nose is cold. Your legs are fine. Your back is tolerable. Your face is not. You pull the blanket higher. Then you realize the fire has burned down again. Mostly coals now. No tall flames. Much less radiant heat. You could stay wrapped up and hope someone else handles it. That is a very attractive plan. Then you remember that everyone else may be thinking exactly the same thing. You reach one arm out. The cold air immediately enters the opening. Terrible decision. You sit up anyway. Your warm little pocket collapses. Now the whole night reaches you at once. You lean toward the fire and push the remaining fuel inward. A few coals brighter. You place another piece across them. For a moment, nothing happens. Then a thin line of flame appears underneath. It grows. Heat begins returning to your hands. You stay there long enough to make sure the new fuel is caught. Then you lie down quickly and rebuild the blankets around yourself. Now you are cold again because you got up to make yourself warmer. Outdoor sleeping contains many small jokes like this. The fire strengthens. Your blanket pocket slowly warms. You turn onto your side. Better. Across camp, another cowboy may be asleep with his hat pulled low over his face. Someone else is snoring. One man may be missing entirely because he is on herd duty. The cook may be wrapped up near the wagon. There is no need for conversation. Everyone knows what the night requires. Rest when you can. Wake when you must. Stay warm enough. Keep the herd quiet. Do it again tomorrow. The cattle themselves affect your sleep. Even when they are calm, they are not silent. You hear breathing, hooves moving, an occasional low call, a horn knocking against another animal. The sound is not necessarily disturbing. In fact, once you have spent enough nights near the herd, normal cattle noise becomes part of the background. What wakes you is a change. Too much movement. A sudden increase in sound. A rider calling. A horse reacting. The absence of expected quiet. Your ears keep working even when your eyes are closed. This kind of sleep is lighter than sleep in a house. It has to be. Your environment can change. The fire changes. The wind changes. The herd changes. Your watch eventually comes. So your body never fully forgets where it is. Now your feet begin to feel cold. You pull them closer together. That helps because you reduce the amount of exposed surface and keep more warmth inside the bedding. You may curl slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to conserve heat. Your knees come up. Your shoulders round forward. The shape is less elegant than the long, relaxed figure shown in some Western art. It works better. You notice another thing. The ground beneath your hip has warmed slightly. Not because the earth itself is warm, but because your insulation has slowed the exchange long enough for the tiny space around your body to become less cold. Then you move. The new patch of ground is colder. Immediately, you move back. There is another lesson learned without words. Stay inside the warm zone you have already created. Your blankets now have a shape. The bedding beneath you has compressed where you lie. The upper layers have settled around your shoulders. Warm air is trapped near your torso. Moving too much destroys some of that arrangement, but not moving at all leaves one side cold. So the night becomes a compromise between preserving your little warm pocket and rotating toward the fire often enough to balance the heat. Front, side, back, side again. There is no schedule. Your body decides. The adjustments become smaller as sleep deepens. A shoulder turns. A foot moves. A hand pulls the blanket edge without you really waking. Humans are good at this. We respond to discomfort before we always become fully conscious of it. That matters here because sleeping beside a fire in freezing weather is not a single solution. It is continuous correction. The fire burns lower. You add fuel. The wind changes. You turn. The blanket opens. You tuck it. Your boots cool. You pull your feet closer. The ground presses against your hip. You shift slightly. Each correction is small enough to seem unimportant. Together, they are how the night passes. This also explains why exhaustion is both helpful and dangerous. A tired cowboy may fall asleep quickly. After a long day in the saddle, that part is easy. But extreme exhaustion can make a man slower to respond to cold, wet bedding, weak fire, or changing weather. Most ordinary nights do not become emergencies. They simply become uncomfortable. But discomfort is information. Cold feet, cold back, smoke, wind, damp cloth. Those sensations tell you something in the system needs adjusting. You learn not to ignore them completely. The fire brightens again. You turn your back toward it. Heat spreads through the outer layer of your coat. Your hands disappear beneath the blanket. For several minutes, still. No one moves. The cattle settle. The wind drops. The flames make a low sound as they work through the fresh fuel. This is probably as comfortable as tonight will become. Not warm in the modern sense. Warm enough. That phrase keeps returning because it describes the whole cattle drive night. Enough bedding, enough fire, enough dryness, enough protection from wind, enough sleep before your turn on guard. You do not need the prairie to become comfortable. You need your small space inside it to remain manageable. And for a while, it does. Then the wind strengthens. The flames lean sharply to one side. Smoke changes direction. The warm pocket around your blankets begins leaking heat faster than before. You open your eyes. The fire is still there. The blankets are still there. Nothing has failed. But the entire night has just become colder. Because wind changes everything. The wind arrives without asking permission. A few minutes ago, the fire was standing mostly upright. Now the flames bend. Sparks move sideways. The warm air around your bedroll thins. Nothing about the campsite has changed except the movement of air, and yet the whole night feels different. This is why wind matters so much. Cold air by itself is one problem. Cold air that keeps moving across your clothes and blankets is another. Your body warms a thin layer of air close to your skin and inside your clothing. Your blankets trap more of it. That still air is useful because it slows heat loss. Wind disrupts it. It carries away the warmer air near exposed surfaces and replaces it with colder air. Then your body has to warm the new air. Again, and again, and again. The stronger the wind, the faster that cycle happens. You do not need a weather instrument to understand it. You feel it on your face. Your nose goes cold first, then your ears, then the back of your neck where the coat collar does not quite close. You pull the blanket higher. That helps. Then the wind catches the loose edge. The blanket lifts. Cold air enters. You grab the corner and tuck it under your shoulder. Now you are not simply using blankets for insulation. You are trying to make them wind resistant. This is where an outer layer of canvas becomes more valuable than its thickness suggests. Canvas may not provide much warmth by itself, but it can reduce the amount of air moving through the softer layers underneath. If the wind cannot penetrate as easily, the blankets have a better chance of holding the warmth your body has already produced. That is the principle. Block movement outside. Trap still air inside. You roll slightly tighter into the bedding. The difference is immediate. The outer air still feels cold. Inside, the temperature stabilizes again. Then the wind shifts direction. Now it is coming from behind your head. You turn the bedroll a little. That sounds simple. It is less simple when you are half asleep, wrapped in blankets, wearing boots, and trying not to put your bedding closer to sparks. Still, you move. Head toward the sheltered side, feet toward the open side. The fire remains visible. You settle again. Better. This is why the campsite was chosen carefully before dark. A creek bank now blocks part of the wind. Earlier, It looked like an ordinary rise in the earth. At midnight, it becomes part of your heating system. Not because it creates heat, because it prevents heat from disappearing quite so quickly. A wagon can do something similar. If positioned appropriately, the chuck wagon gives a solid barrier against moving air. Men sleeping near it may benefit from that protection depending on how camp is arranged. Brush can help. A low ridge can help. Even a shallow depression can reduce exposure, provided it is not damp or collecting colder air. Again, nothing has to eliminate the wind completely. Reduction is enough. A smaller draft means your blankets work better. A calmer flame means less fuel wasted. Less smoke blows directly into your face. Fewer sparks travel sideways. Several problems improve at once. That is useful, because wind does not attack only your body. It changes the fire too. More moving air can make a fire burn faster. That sounds helpful for about 5 minutes. The flames brighten. You feel more heat. Then you notice the fuel disappearing more quickly. A fire that consumes wood faster requires more wood. If the supply beside camp is limited, that extra burn rate matters. Wind also makes the flame less predictable. One moment the heat reaches your blanket. The next, the flames lean away and much of the radiant heat goes somewhere else. Then they return. Then smoke arrives. The stable little campfire of early evening has become a moving object. You watch someone get up and adjust the fuel. The pieces are pushed closer together. Loose embers are checked. A larger chunk is added carefully. Nobody wants a fire spreading into dry grass. On open range, that risk cannot be treated casually. Fire that escapes camp can become dangerous quickly, especially when vegetation is dry and wind is strong. So the same wind that makes you want a larger fire is also one reason not to build one carelessly. This is another trade. More fire gives more warmth. More fire also gives more sparks, more fuel consumption, and more potential trouble. The answer is usually not spectacle. The answer is control. You lower your head again. Your hat brim moves in the wind. You pull it tighter. Now listen to the cattle. The herd is less quiet than before. Wind makes cattle harder to read. It carries sounds away in one direction and toward you in another. It moves brush. It rattles equipment. It changes the smell and feel of the night. Animals notice weather too. A restless herd means the night riders have more work. And if the wind comes with a sudden drop in temperature, rain, sleet, or snow, the entire camp can become more alert. You may be lying down, but nobody is guaranteed a full night of uninterrupted rest. The man on herd watch has it worse. He is not wrapped in a bedroll. He is sitting on a horse. That means more of his body is exposed. His hands manage reins. His legs remain bent. His coat catches the wind. His horse produces some warmth beneath him, but the rider still has to deal with cold moving air for the length of the watch. When he returns to camp, he may be chilled in a way you are not. The fire becomes more important to him. He dismounts, walks stiffly toward the coals, holds his hands out, warms the front of his coat, perhaps drinks coffee if there is some available. Then someone else gets up to take his place. The warmth of camp is never distributed evenly because the work is never distributed evenly through the night. One man is asleep. One man is waking. One man is riding. One man is feeding the fire. The herd does not care which one is tired. The wind does not care either. You feel another gust hit the canvas. The outer layer flutters but stays tucked. Good. Without that barrier, the same gust might push directly through gaps in the blankets. You notice how different this feels from an exposed sleeping position. A few feet can matter. Behind the bank, the air is still moving, but the worst force is gone. This is one of those practical advantages that never looks dramatic in a painting. A cowboy asleep beside a heroic campfire under an open sky makes a good picture. A cowboy deliberately putting himself behind a dirt bank because he understands wind makes a better survival strategy. The romance is in the picture. The survival is in the placement. Toward the coldest part of the night, this matters more. The fire is lower. Your body is tired. You have already lost heat through several hours of exposure. Any dampness in clothing feels colder. Your muscles are no longer working hard enough to generate the kind of heat they did while riding. The small advantages accumulate. Dry bedding, shelter from wind, a hat over your head, blankets sealed around the shoulders, a fire that still has fuel, enough food from supper. None is sufficient by itself. Together, they are the reason you can lie still. Then the wind finds another opening near your feet. You feel it immediately. Your boots are inside the lower part of the bedding, but the edge has loosened. You tuck it down. Your feet warm again. The correction takes 5 seconds. Those 5 seconds are the night. You keep making small repairs to the barrier between your body and the weather. The wind exposes weaknesses. An untucked blanket, a gap at the neck, a poorly placed bedroll, a low fire, a damp layer. Fix each one and the system recovers. Ignore enough of them and the cold begins winning. For now, you have enough protection. The bank blocks the strongest gusts. The fire burns low but steady. Your blankets are tight. Your clothes are dry enough. You close your eyes. Then something changes again. Not the wind. The fabric near your shoulder feels colder. You touch it. Damp. Only slightly. But in freezing weather, slightly damp is the beginning of a new problem. Damp. Only slightly. But in freezing weather, slightly damp is enough to get your attention. You rub the cloth between your fingers. The outer layer has picked up moisture somewhere along the way. Maybe from frost. Maybe from damp ground. Maybe from your own breath collecting near the edge of the blanket. Maybe the fabric brushed wet grass when you moved the bedroll. The source matters less than the result. Moisture changes the way your sleeping system works. Dry fibers trap air. That trapped air slows heat loss. Add water, and some of those spaces fill. The material becomes heavier. It conducts heat more easily. And if the temperature drops far enough, that moisture can begin to freeze. This is why staying dry is one of the quiet rules behind almost everything you do on a cold cattle drive. The fire gets attention because you can see it. Dryness is less dramatic, but dryness may matter more. You sit up and inspect the blanket. The damp patch is small. Good. You turn that part toward the fire. Not too close. You have already learned that lesson. Warm air begins moving across the cloth. You hold it there for a while. Steam is not pouring from it. Nothing spectacular happens. The fabric simply becomes a little less damp. That is enough. Now imagine the problem on a worse night. Rain begins during the drive. Not heavy enough to stop the herd, just steady enough to soak everything. Your coat darkens. Your hat sheds water until it cannot shed much more. Your trousers become wet along the thighs. Water runs from the saddle. Your gloves, if you have them, become damp. Your socks absorb moisture from boots that are no longer dry inside. And because the cattle still have to move, you keep riding. Cold rain is particularly unpleasant because it attacks both sides of the system. It cools you directly, and it weakens your insulation. You are producing heat through movement, so while you are working, the situation may feel manageable. Then camp comes. You stop. Your muscles stop producing as much heat. The temperature falls. Now every wet layer begins reminding you that it is wet. The same clothing that protected you in dry cold can become far less effective when saturated. Wool has an advantage here. It can retain some insulating ability even when damp because of the structure of its fibers and the air that can remain within the material. But still useful when damp does not mean pleasant when soaked. A wet wool blanket can feel heavy enough to make that distinction obvious. It also takes time to dry. Time requires fire. Fire requires fuel. Fuel requires labor. There is the chain again. One wet object becomes several problems. The cowboy who keeps his bedding dry has saved himself work before the work even begins. That is where canvas or a tarpaulin earns its place. During travel, bedding can be wrapped so the better insulating layers are less exposed to weather and dirt. At camp, an outer layer can help protect against dew and moisture from the ground. The exact arrangements vary, but the logic is constant. Protect the dry layers, because once they are wet, you cannot simply order new ones from somewhere nearby. The trail carries what it carries. You look around camp. The fire has become a drying station. A coat hangs where heat can reach it without scorching it. Socks are turned. Gloves or other small pieces sit nearby. A wet edge of canvas is open toward the warmth. Men check their belongings by touch. Still damp. Turn it. Too hot. Move it back. Dry enough. Put it on. This is slow work. And because everything smells of smoke afterward, there is no illusion that you have achieved laundry. You have achieved function. That is better. Now consider your feet. They are especially difficult. A wet shirt is uncomfortable. Wet socks inside cold boots can become miserable quickly. Your feet are enclosed, so moisture has fewer places to go. If socks are wet from sweat, rain, or a creek crossing, they keep cold material pressed directly against the skin. You want them dry? If you have a spare dry pair, that is valuable. If you do not, the fire becomes your best option. You remove the wet socks. Your bare feet immediately feel the night. You hold them toward the heat. Pins and needles, then relief. The socks go near the fire, not on it. You turn them repeatedly. They begin to warm. The same goes for boots, but more carefully. Leather does not appreciate careless treatment. A boot placed too close to strong heat may dry too fast, stiffen, distort, or crack. That creates tomorrow's problem while solving tonight's. So you warm them gradually. There is no point gaining dry feet if the price is damaged footwear on a trail where you may spend 10 or more hours in the saddle the next day. This is what practical survival looks like. Every solution has to survive tomorrow too. The night is not the whole journey. Your coat matters for the same reason. If it is damp, you may choose to keep it near the fire before sleeping. But you cannot leave yourself exposed while waiting. So perhaps one blanket goes around your shoulders while the coat dries. Then the coat returns. The system changes according to what is wet. Dryness is managed piece by piece. Now think about sweat. Rain is obvious. Sweat is easier to miss. During the day, you are riding, working cattle, lifting gear, tightening cinches, helping with crossings, sometimes moving fast enough to become hot even in cold weather. If you dress too heavily, you sweat. Then the sun goes down. Your activity drops. The moisture inside your shirt and under your coat cools. Suddenly the clothing that seemed almost too warm becomes clammy. Experienced outdoor workers learn to adjust before that happens, when they can. Open the coat. Remove a layer temporarily. Avoid becoming soaked from inside. Again, nobody needs the language of modern outdoor clothing systems to discover the principle. Sweat during work. Freeze during rest. You remember. The cattle create another wet problem. Creek crossings. A rider may enter water to guide animals, help with trouble, or follow the herd through a crossing. Sometimes the water stays below the boots. Sometimes it does not. A boot full of cold water does not negotiate. You know immediately, back on dry ground, that water has to go somewhere. Drain, dry. Change socks if possible. Warm feet. Continue. And if the weather is already below freezing, the urgency increases. Water on exposed equipment can stiffen into ice. Wet fabric can freeze. A damp outer surface becomes rigid. Even frost settling overnight can add moisture that has to be dealt with in the morning. That means bedding is not only protected before sleep, it must be managed after sleep too. At dawn, you may find frost on the outer canvas. Perhaps the surface is white and crisp. You shake it, brush it. If the sun appears, you may use whatever drying time exists while breakfast is being prepared and horses are being readied. But the herd is not going to wait half the day for your blankets to become perfectly dry. So prevention matters again. Keep the good layers covered. Do not spread them carelessly on wet soil. Do not leave them where dew can soak them unnecessarily. Roll them properly. Protect them during travel. Small habits. Large effect. You settle back into your bedroll. The damp patch has mostly dried. You feel for it again. Better. You turn that side away from the ground. The inside layers remain warm. That is what you wanted. The fire burns low. The wind is still present, but the bank takes the worst of it. Your socks are dry. Your coat is dry enough. The bedroll is dry enough. Not perfect. Enough. Then you hear hoofbeats beyond camp. Slow at first. One of the night riders is circling the herd. He has been out there in the same cold while you have been wrapped in blankets. Soon he will come back. And when he does, someone else will have to leave this fire and take his place. Because the most difficult part of sleeping during a freezing cattle drive is that sleep is only half of what the night requires. The cattle still need watching. The hoofbeats come closer. Slow. Measured. A horse appears at the edge of the firelight. Then the rider. He has been out with the herd while you were lying under blankets. His shoulders are stiff. His coat is pale with frost in places. His horse exhales into the cold air as he dismounts. For him, the fire is not scenery. It is recovery. He walks toward it without saying much. Hands first, then one side of the body, then the other. The difference between his night and yours is simple. You have been trying to keep heat from escaping while lying still. He has been trying to stay warm while sitting above the ground, exposed to wind, moving slowly around cattle that cannot be left alone. And now your turn is getting closer. This is the part of cattle drive sleep that old paintings tend to leave out. The bedroll is not yours until sunrise. It is yours until somebody wakes you. A trail herd usually needs men on guard during the night. The exact system varies by outfit, herd size, weather, and the trail boss, but the reason is obvious. Thousands of cattle do not become harmless because the sun goes down. They can drift. They can bunch. They can become restless. And if something frightens enough animals at once, a quiet night can become a stampede. So riders take turns. You may get a few hours of sleep. Then you work. Then perhaps you sleep again. The body would prefer one long, uninterrupted block. The cattle have other plans. Someone touches your shoulder. You wake immediately because part of you has been expecting it. The warm pocket inside your blankets feels perfect now, which is unfortunate because you have to leave it. You sit up. Cold air pours in. You pull on anything you loosened earlier. Hat, coat, gloves if you have them, boots secure, neckerchief adjusted. You do not want to discover something is missing after you are already away from camp. The rider who has just returned tells you what matters. The herd is mostly quiet. A few cattle are restless on one side. The wind has shifted. Nothing dramatic. That is exactly how you want the report. You walk toward your horse. Every step away from the campfire weakens its heat. A few yards, then more. Soon the orange light is behind you, and the cold feels larger. You mount. The saddle is cold. Leather that felt familiar all day now feels hard against tired muscles. Your horse is warm underneath you, and that helps a little, but most of your body remains exposed. You begin moving along the edge of the herd. Slowly. There is no reason to excite them. Night herding is partly about presence. You move where cattle can hear and sometimes see you. You watch the edges. You listen for changes. Sometimes riders sing or speak quietly while circling the herd. The sound lets cattle know where the men are and may help keep them accustomed to movement in the dark. A calm voice is enough. You ride. Your horse's hooves make a soft rhythm. The cattle breathe. Occasionally, one shifts and another follows. A horn taps against a neighbouring horn. A hoof scrapes dirt. These are ordinary sounds. The job is to notice when ordinary becomes different. A sudden movement spreads fast. Several animals stand. Heads lift. The herd grows louder. That is when attention sharpens. You do not want to react dramatically to every movement. Nervous riders can make nervous cattle worse. You want calm, control. Move closer. Turn an animal back. Use your voice. Give the herd time to settle. Then continue the circle. Cold now becomes a different problem. You cannot solve it by curling up. Your hands remain on the reins. Your upper body faces the wind. If you get too cold, fingers become stiff, feet numb, shoulders tight. So clothing matters differently on watch. In the bedroll, blankets create your insulated pocket. On horseback, your coat, shirt, vest, gloves, hat, and other layers have to do almost everything. Night guard is often slow work, so sitting in the saddle produces little extra warmth. So you move fingers inside gloves, flex toes inside boots, shift your shoulders. Small movements, just enough to keep from becoming completely still. Now the fire behind you becomes psychologically important. You cannot feel it. You know it is there. At the end of the watch there is a place where you can warm your hands. A little orange centre in a black landscape. You keep riding, because eventually you will be riding back to that light. Weather can make the watch harder. A calm, freezing night is one thing. Wind is worse. Rain or sleet can wet clothing and make horses uncomfortable. Snow reduces visibility and covers familiar ground. A storm can make cattle restless at exactly the moment riders are coldest and most exhausted. Then the neat division between sleeping men and working men may disappear. If the herd threatens to run, everyone may be needed. Blankets are abandoned. Men mount. The night becomes work. This is the failure hidden inside the normal sleep system. Your bedding can be excellent. The fire can be strong. The campsite can be sheltered. None of it guarantees rest if the cattle become unstable. The herd always outranks the bedroll. That is why exhaustion accumulates on a difficult drive. One bad night does not stand alone. You ride the next day after it. Then make camp again. Then take another watch. Cold becomes harder to tolerate when you are tired because your body and attention are already under strain. This is why routines help. Protect bedding, gather fuel, eat, dry clothing, check gear, sleep when your turn allows it. Wake when called. The routine carries part of the load. Your watch continues. The stars appear painfully sharp in the cold. The herd settles again. Your horse knows the slow pattern now. Around. Listen. Around again. Nothing happens. That is success. A good night watch is boring. You want it boring. No stampede. No cattle scattered into darkness. Just cold, fatigue, and a slow circle around animals breathing quietly. Eventually, another rider approaches. Your replacement? You exchange the useful details. Quiet. Wind stronger on one side. A few animals still restless. Nothing serious. Then you turn toward camp. The fire is low, but visible. You dismount. Your legs are stiff again. You hold your hands over the coals. Someone has left enough fuel nearby to bring the flame back. You add a piece. Wait. A small flame catches. Your fingers begin to ache as they warm. Then you look at the bedroll. It has been sitting there the whole time. The blankets are cold on the outside, but the dry layers are waiting. You climb back inside. The first touch feels cold. Then your body begins rebuilding the pocket of warmth you left behind. This time you understand something more clearly. Cowboys did not sleep through freezing cattle drive nights because a campfire made the prairie comfortable. They slept in fragments because the herd demanded labor through the dark. The fire warmed them between watches. The bedroll conserved heat between watches. The clothing carried warmth away from camp. And the whole system worked because someone was always awake. Your eyes close again. You have earned another piece of sleep. But the cold has used energy. The riding has used energy. By morning, your body will need to replace it. And that brings the next quiet part of staying warm. Food. You wake hungry. Not politely hungry. Not the sort of hunger that can wait while you decide whether breakfast sounds appealing. This is the deep, blunt hunger that arrives after hours in cold air, broken sleep, and work. Your body has spent the night producing heat. It has spent energy riding. It has spent more energy getting up, walking to the horse, taking a watch, coming back, rebuilding warmth inside the blankets, and then doing its best to keep you warm until dawn. Cold does not make food optional. It makes food more important. The fire can warm your skin from the outside. Food helps your body keep producing heat from the inside. That is the simple version. Your body converts energy from food into the work of staying alive, moving muscles, maintaining organs, and producing heat along the way. When you are active in cold weather, those demands stack together. Which is why the camp cook matters far more than the romantic image sometimes gives him credit for. He is not merely the man who makes coffee. He is part of the survival system. On a cattle drive, the chuck wagon carries the kitchen, food stores, cookware, and many of the supplies needed to keep the outfit moving. The cook has to produce meals for men who may spend most of the day on horseback and part of the night awake with the herd. That food has to be practical, portable, durable, fast enough to prepare under trail conditions, and substantial enough that men can work again tomorrow. Menus vary by outfit and region, but common trail foods could include beans, bacon or salt pork, beef, bread or biscuits, dried fruit when available, and plenty of coffee. Coffee deserves its reputation, not because it is magical, because it is hot, familiar, easy to prepare in quantity, and very welcome when you have just climbed out of a cold bedroll. You hold the cup between your hands. That alone feels useful. Steam reaches your face. The metal cup is hot enough that you shift your fingers around it. Then you drink. The liquid warms your mouth and throat. For a few minutes, the morning becomes easier, but the heat in the cup is not the main source of lasting warmth. The calories in breakfast matter more. A plate of beans and meat is less poetic than sunrise over the plains. It is also more useful to a man who has to spend another day controlling cattle. Protein and fat from meat. Carbohydrates from beans, bread, biscuits, or other staples. The practical result is simple. You eat because you have work to do. Cold increases the importance of that fuel because your body is already spending energy just maintaining temperature. Think about last night. Every time you shivered, your muscles were contracting rapidly to generate heat. Shivering is work. It uses energy. If you stayed warm enough not to shiver much, that is better, but your body was still constantly regulating temperature beneath the blankets. Then you climbed onto a horse. Then you sat in the wind. Then you came back and warmed up again. Nothing about that night was free. Now breakfast replaces part of what was spent. You eat quickly, but not necessarily silently. Camp is waking around you. Men roll bedding. Someone checks horses. Someone brings water. The cook moves between fire and wagon. The smell of coffee, grease, smoke, damp wool, and livestock settles into the morning air. It is not delicate. It is effective. You look at the fire. Last night, it kept appearing as the center of warmth. This morning, it becomes the center of food. Same fuel, different job. That is another reason firewood or other usable fuel mattered so much. Without heat, you lose more than the comfort of sitting beside flames. You lose the easiest way to boil coffee, to cook beans, to fry or heat meat, to bake or warm bread depending on equipment, to heat water, to dry clothing. One missing resource begins touching everything. The cook, therefore, has his own fuel problem. He needs enough to make meals reliably. If every cowboy burns enormous personal fires through the night, the outfit may simply be turning useful fuel into unnecessary flame. A smaller sleeping fire starts making even more sense. Warm enough? Not wasteful. Keep something for morning. You finish the first serving and consider more. On a hard drive, appetite can be substantial. Hours in the saddle still demand effort. Your legs stabilize you. Your back works. Your hands manage reins and rope. You lift tack, mount and dismount, chase strays, and work harder during crossings or bad weather. Then there is the cold. Food supports all of it. This is where the myth of toughness can become misleading again. A cowboy does not stay warm because he has somehow trained himself not to need energy. He stays warm partly because he eats. If food becomes scarce, the system weakens. Fatigue grows. Work becomes harder. Cold feels harder. You may become less willing to get out of the blankets to adjust the fire, less careful with equipment, slower on night watch, more miserable in the saddle. Survival skills do not remove biological needs. They manage them. Water matters too. Cold weather can hide thirst, but you still lose water through breathing and exertion. Coffee provides fluid, though plain water remains important. Horses need water. Cattle need water. Men need water. The location of last night's camp was partly chosen around that fact. Everything connects again. Water affects root. Root affects camp. Camp affects fuel. Fuel affects food. Food affects warmth. Warmth affects sleep. Sleep affects work. Work moves the herd. There is no single cowboy trick that makes the system function. It is a chain, and chains become obvious when one link fails. Imagine a bad stretch. The weather turns colder. You sleep poorly. The herd becomes restless. You spend longer on watch. Breakfast is delayed because fuel is wet. You start the day hungry. By afternoon, your shoulders ache more than usual. Your reactions feel slower. The cold evening comes back around. Now you enter the second night, already depleted. This is how discomfort accumulates. Not usually as one grand disaster, as a series of smaller deficits. Less food, less sleep, more wetness, more wind, more work. Each one takes something. That is why a hot meal can feel much larger than the ingredients suggest. It restores routine. Sit, eat, drink, warm hands, get dry, return to work. The routine matters too. A familiar cup of coffee tells you the night is ending. Breakfast tells you the outfit is moving again. You finish the cup. The fire is brighter now because breakfast required it. For a few minutes, your front becomes almost too warm. Behind you, frost still lies on the grass. That contrast says nearly everything about cattle drive cold. Warmth exists in small places. Inside a coat, inside a bedroll, beside a fire, around a cup, inside a body that has enough fuel to keep working. Then someone begins rolling the last blankets. The cattle are stirring. The horses are being readied. Soon camp will disappear. You stand. Your stomach is full enough. Your hands are warm enough. Your clothing is dry enough. Again, not perfect. Enough. But there is one assumption hidden inside everything you did last night and everything the cook is doing this morning. The fire had fuel. On the next stretch of trail that may not be guaranteed. By late afternoon, the landscape has changed. The trees are thinner now. Then fewer. Then, for a long stretch, almost none. You notice this before camp, because everyone who depends on a fire notices it. The cattle continue forward. The wagon continues forward. The wind continues doing exactly what it did yesterday. But the easy piles of dead branches beside the trail are gone. Tonight, fuel is going to require more thought. That sounds like a small inconvenience until you remember how many things depend on fire. Supper, coffee, dry clothing, warm hands, a little light after dark, and, when the temperature drops, the extra warmth beside the bedroll. So the question is not simply whether you can make a fire. The question is what you can afford to burn. The American cattle trails crossed enormous distances and very different kinds of country. One evening might put you near a wooded creek where fuel is obvious. Another could leave you on open prairie where trees are scarce and anything burnable has to be gathered deliberately. You cannot assume that the landscape will supply a convenient stack of seasoned firewood every few miles. It will not. So the outfit adapts. The cook is often among the first people to care about this because his fire is essential. He needs enough heat to prepare food. That is not negotiable. Your personal comfort comes after that. If fuel is scarce, nobody sensible burns a mountain of it beside his own blankets while the cook has nothing left for breakfast. This is where the famous buffalo chip becomes useful. Dried buffalo dung had long been used as fuel on the Great Plains where wood was scarce. Dry is the important word. Fresh manure is not what you want. Old, dried dung can be surprisingly light, easy to gather, and capable of burning well enough for cooking and heat. You bend down and pick up one of the dry pieces. It weighs less than expected. There is no romance in your hand. There is fuel. That is enough. Travellers crossing the plains had learned the same lesson long before the great cattle drives. If a landscape does not give you timber, you learn what else will burn. Buffalo chips became one of those practical substitutes. By the peak cattle drive years, the great buffalo herds themselves were being destroyed rapidly across much of the plains. So availability varied with place and time. You do not imagine an endless carpet of perfect fuel waiting beside every trail. You use what is actually there. Dry dung, brush, twigs, dead wood from creek bottoms, Whatever can safely produce useful heat. The fire tonight may look different. A wood fire can produce larger flames and durable coals depending on the wood. A fire made largely from dried dung is usually less dramatic. That is fine. You are not performing for an audience. You need enough heat to boil water and cook supper. Later, you need enough remaining fuel to revive the fire when the cold deepens. This makes conservation part of the evening. You do not throw fuel on because you enjoy watching flames grow. You add what is needed, then wait. A small fire concentrates the work. The cook arranges his utensils close to the useful heat. Men who want to warm their hands come nearer rather than demanding a larger blaze. Wet clothing is dried carefully, one piece at a time. Your bedroll remains mostly responsible for keeping you warm once you lie down. The fire helps. It does not replace bedding. You can see now why that distinction matters so much. If your entire cold weather plan depends on an enormous fire, a treeless stretch of trail destroys the plan. If your system depends on dry blankets, clothing, insulation from the ground, protection from wind, sufficient food, and then a modest fire as an additional source of warmth, you have more options. The system can bend. That is what experienced survival systems do. They do not depend on one perfect condition. They have substitutes. Less wood? Use alternative fuel where available. Smaller fire? Depend more on bedding. Strong wind? Find better shelter. Damp clothes? Dry the essential pieces first. Nothing becomes comfortable, but it can remain workable. The sun goes down. The fire tonight is noticeably smaller than the one from the previous camp. You miss the stronger radiant heat immediately. When you hold your hands toward it, you need to be closer. The side of your coat facing the flames warms, but not as deeply. The cold beyond the fire feels larger. You are tempted to add more fuel. Then you look at the pile. There is not much. That pile has to survive supper. The first part of the night, perhaps a cold hour before dawn, and breakfast, so you leave it alone. This is another way the landscape controls sleep. Yesterday, you could correct cold by feeding the fire. Tonight, you may correct cold by tightening the blanket. You pull the outer canvas around your bedroll, tuck the lower edge, close the coat, keep the hat on, lie nearer the sheltered side of camp. Every small efficiency becomes more valuable when fuel is limited. Now imagine something worse. Rain has soaked the available wood. The pieces you gather are damp. They smoke. They resist catching. You spend longer coaxing the fire. Dry tinder becomes precious. A sheltered flame matters. The cook may protect the starting fire from wind while slowly adding material that can dry and catch. Once there is a strong enough coal bed, some damp fuel becomes easier to use. But every minute spent fighting wet wood is a minute when everyone is colder. That is why dry fuel collected earlier can be worth carrying a short distance into camp. Preparation buys time later. The same principle appears everywhere. Dry socks now save cold feet later. A protected blanket now saves drying time later. Fuel gathered before dark saves a miserable search after dark. Small work done early prevents larger work when you are tired. By midnight, the fire has shrunk almost completely to coals. You wake and look at it. Yesterday, you might have added a large piece of wood. Tonight, there is no large piece. You push the coals together, add one small piece of remaining fuel, then another only after the first has caught. You do not need a blaze. You need the coals alive. That difference saves fuel. The fire brightens just enough to warm your hands. Then you return to the blankets. This night is colder inside your memory because the visible fire is smaller, but your body is not dramatically colder. That surprises you. The bedroll is doing more of the work than you realized. The ground beneath you is insulated. The wind is partly blocked. Your clothes are dry. Your stomach has food in it. The blankets hold the heat you produce. The little fire contributes what it can. That is the deeper correction. Cowboys did not survive cold nights because they always had giant campfires. Often, they could not. The West was too varied. Fuel was too valuable. The job moved too constantly. What kept the system functioning was flexibility. Use wood when there is wood. Use another practical fuel when there is not. Burn enough. Save some. Protect the coals. Let clothing and bedding carry most of the night. The fire is one tool inside a larger system, not the system itself. Before dawn, the last added fuel settles into a faint red glow. You can barely feel it from your bedroll. Still, you are warm enough to remain where you are. That is success. Then the temperature falls another few degrees. A rider comes in from the herd with ice forming along the edge of his coat. The wind is strengthening again, and suddenly the ordinary solutions begin reaching their limits. A blanket can only insulate so much. A fire can only burn what you have. At some point, the weather can simply overwhelm the system. The first sign that the ordinary system is failing is not dramatic. It is that you stop getting warmer. You have done everything correctly. The bedroll is dry enough. The coat is closed. The blankets are tucked. The fire is alive. The windbreak still helps. You have eaten, and still, the cold keeps pressing inward. That is the limit nobody can negotiate with forever. Every protective layer only slows heat loss. Every fire only produces as much heat as its fuel allows. Every human body only produces so much warmth. If the temperature drops far enough, the wind rises hard enough, or moisture gets into enough of your clothing and bedding, the balance can flip. Heat begins leaving faster than you can replace it. Then comfort is no longer the problem. Function is... Your fingers stiffen first. Small movements become clumsy. A knot that was easy yesterday now takes longer. Leather feels hard. Metal feels painfully cold. Your feet lose sensation in the toes. You shift them inside the blankets. Rub them, pull them closer. For a while, that helps. Then you hear someone at the edge of camp. A rider is coming in early. His horse is blowing hard. The rider says the herd is restless. The wind has strengthened. A few cattle have started drifting. This is exactly the kind of problem that ruins the neat separation between sleep and work. If the herd starts moving, men get up. You throw the blankets aside. Cold air hits everything at once. The warm pocket you built over the last hour disappears in seconds. You stand. Your legs are stiff. Your hands go to your coat. Then your boots. Then your hat. Cold makes ordinary actions slower. You move toward the horses. The fire remains behind you. You are leaving the one fixed source of heat at exactly the moment you want it most. Out by the herd. The wind is stronger. Some cattle are packed more tightly together. Others are moving along the edge. A few heads are up. The calm breathing pattern from earlier is gone. Now there is more hoof noise. More shifting. More tension. The job is to keep that tension from spreading. You ride the edge slowly. Do not rush them. Do not shout without need. Move the animals that are starting to drift. Use your horse. Use your voice. Keep pressure low. The worst thing would be to turn nervous cattle into frightened cattle. Then sleet begins. Not heavy, just enough to coat the front of your coat and sting your face. The weather has now attacked the system in 3 places. Wind strips heat. Moisture weakens insulation. The herd demands movement when you should be conserving energy. That combination matters more than any single temperature. A cold, dry night can be manageable. A windy, wet night can be far worse at a temperature that looks less impressive on paper. The storm changes everything at once. Your horse becomes harder to manage. Visibility gets worse. The ground changes under hoof. Clothing grows wet. The fire back at camp becomes harder to maintain. The herd becomes less predictable, and nobody sleeps. You ride another circle. Your gloves are damp now. The cold reaches your fingers faster. You flex them against the reins. You have to keep enough feeling to control the horse. That is the threshold that matters. Not whether your hands hurt, whether they still work. A cowboy can tolerate discomfort. He cannot tolerate losing the ability to do the job. The same applies to feet. If they are numb, mounting and dismounting becomes less secure. If your legs are stiff, quick movement becomes harder. If your clothing is soaked, every stop becomes colder. The system degrades one practical ability at a time. Then someone decides to move part of the herd toward better shelter. Perhaps there is a creek bottom, perhaps a bank, perhaps any terrain that cuts the wind. But the logic is the same as it was when you chose your bedroll site. Reduce exposure. Only now you are doing it for cattle and riders at the same time. The herd shifts. Slowly. Nobody wants a rush. You ride the outside. Another man works the opposite edge. The cattle resist, then begin to follow. For a while, the entire problem becomes movement. No one thinks about sleep. The only goal is to restore control. Eventually, the herd settles in the new position. Not perfectly. Enough calm, enough shelter, enough control, enough heat left in your hands to keep working. Now you ride back to camp. The fire has suffered too. Wind has pushed ash across the ground. Sleet has dampened exposed fuel. The bright flames are gone. Someone has protected a small coal bed beneath partially burned wood. That tiny red patch is suddenly valuable. Men gather around it. A little dry fuel is added. Someone shields the flame from the wind with his body. The fire catches weakly. Then better. Steam begins lifting from coats. Nobody talks much. This is no longer the easy warmth of supper. It is repair. You remove wet gloves. Hold your hands toward the heat. Check fingers. Flex them. Good. Still working. Then boots. Still wet outside. Socks. Damp, but not soaked. Better than they could be. The bedroll is next. The outer layer took some sleet while you were gone. The inside is mostly protected. That matters enormously. You open it carefully. Keep the dry blankets away from wet ground. Use the fire to dry the outer surface as much as you reasonably can. You do not waste time chasing perfection. You need function. This is the point where skill becomes less about creating comfort and more about preserving margin. Keep one dry layer. Keep one usable fire. Keep the cattle from running. Keep enough energy to continue. That is survival at the edge of the system, not heroics. Margins, and sometimes even those margins disappear. A soaked bedroll can leave a man with little effective insulation. A fire can fail when fuel is wet or exhausted. A horse can go lame. A rider can become sick. A stampede can force men to stay mounted for hours. A severe storm can arrive faster and harder than expected. In those conditions, cowboy toughness stops explaining anything useful. Toughness does not make wet wool dry. Toughness does not create firewood. Toughness does not stop wind. Practical survival comes from resources, experience, teamwork, and changing the plan before things become worse. The experienced man does not wait until his hands are useless before warming them. He does not wait until the blankets are soaked before protecting them. He does not wait until the herd is running before noticing that it is restless. He acts while the problem is still small. Earlier correction, smaller failure, less damage. The storm eventually weakens. The wind drops. The sleet becomes intermittent. The cattle settle down. You return to the bedroll. The outer canvas is damp. The inner blankets are mostly dry. You crawl inside, wearing more clothing than before. The first few minutes are cold. Then your body begins warming the space again. Slower this time. You are more tired, but the system still works. Barely. And that is enough. You lie there listening to the last gusts pass over camp. The fire is small. The herd is quiet again. The worst part of the night is over. Now the larger lesson becomes unavoidable. Cowboys did not survive these freezing drives because cold somehow bothered them less than it would bother you. They survived because they built layer after layer of practical protection around a body that was just as vulnerable to cold as yours. And tomorrow, those layers will have to work again. By morning, the cold feels less mysterious. Not easier, just more understandable. You have spent enough hours inside the system now to see what is actually keeping you alive. It is not one heroic object. Not the fire. Not the blanket. Not the coat. Not some special frontier toughness that modern people have somehow lost. It is the way all the pieces work together. The campsite reduces exposure. The ground layer slows heat loss underneath you. The blankets trap warm air. The outer canvas cuts some wind and moisture. Your clothes stay on because they are already insulation. The fire adds directional heat. Food gives your body energy. Night riders protect the herd. Drying gear protects tomorrow. Fuel management protects the next meal and the next cold hour. And experience tells you which problem to solve first. That is the real system. Once you see that, the famous image of the cowboy beside the campfire changes. The fire is still there. The stars are still there. The horse is still nearby. But the picture is no longer about freedom from ordinary needs. It is about managing them under difficult conditions. You are cold because human bodies get cold. You are tired because work makes bodies tired. You get hungry because heat and labor consume energy. You need sleep because endurance has limits. Nothing about being a cowboy cancels those facts. What changes is how well you manage around them. That is where skill matters. An inexperienced man may waste fuel. He may choose damp ground. He may leave a blanket edge open to the wind. He may soak his clothes with sweat before camp. He may dry boots too close to the fire. He may lie in smoke. He may let sparks land too near bedding. He may underestimate how cold the hours before dawn can become. None of those mistakes sounds dramatic. That is the point. The difference between a miserable night and a manageable one is often a collection of very small decisions. Move 10 feet closer to a bank. Keep one blanket dry. Gather fuel before dark. Eat while food is hot. Protect your feet. Tuck the canvas. Save something for morning. Get up when the fire needs attention. Do not wait until your hands are numb. The experienced cowboy is not necessarily warmer because he owns much better equipment. He may simply lose less heat through bad decisions. That is a quieter kind of competence. You can see it everywhere. On the cattle drive, men learn how tightly to cinch a saddle without hurting the horse, how to recognize cattle beginning to bunch, how to approach a nervous animal, how to cross water, how to find a workable route, how to judge weather, how to repair gear with what is available. Sleeping is part of that same body of knowledge. It does not sit outside the work. It supports the work. A man who sleeps badly becomes a worse rider. A man who cannot warm his hands becomes worse with reins and rope. A man whose feet are damaged by cold or wet boots may struggle to mount. A man who lets his bedding become soaked has made the next night harder before it begins. Rest is therefore not softness. It is maintenance. That may be one of the most modern assumptions worth correcting. We often imagine historical endurance as an ability to ignore discomfort. People in the past certainly endured enormous discomfort, but successful endurance often depended on noticing discomfort early and doing something practical about it. Cold tells you to add a layer. Wet socks tell you to dry them. Smoke tells you to move. Restless cattle tell you to pay attention. A failing fire tells you to save the coals. Painful fingers tell you your margin is shrinking. The body is giving information. Ignoring all of it would not make you tougher. It would make you worse at staying functional. The same is true of community. The solitary cowboy is another powerful image. One rider, one horse, one fire, an enormous landscape. Real cattle drives depend on crews. The cook prepares food. The trail boss makes decisions. Riders handle different positions around the herd. Night watches rotate. Men help during storms, crossings, injuries, and stampedes. One person sleeping can do so partly because another is awake. That fact matters enormously on freezing nights. If everyone had to remain awake beside the cattle until sunrise, the outfit would quickly become exhausted. Instead, work is divided. You rest while someone else rides. Then you ride while someone else rests. The fire one man maintained may warn the next man coming off watch. Fuel another man collected becomes coffee in your cup. Someone warns camp that weather is turning. Someone protects supplies from rain. Someone helps recover scattered cattle. Cold weather survival on a drive is partly individual skill. It is also shared labour. The herd itself creates that necessity. A cattle drive is a moving economic operation. The animals have to reach a destination. They have value only if they can be delivered. That means cowboys endure difficult nights because stopping indefinitely whenever conditions become uncomfortable is usually not an option. There are schedules. Grass changes. Water availability changes. Weather changes. Markets and railheads wait somewhere ahead. The herd consumes resources every day it remains on the trail. So you keep moving when it is reasonable to move. You stop when you must. You adapt in between. That is why cold nights become routine rather than exceptional stories. Not every night is freezing. Not every drive crosses the same weather. Not every cowboy experiences the same conditions. But when cold arrives, the practical problem is familiar. Stay dry. Stay fed. Protect sleep. Keep the herd under control. Protect the horse. Protect the gear. Do not waste fuel. Do not create tomorrow's problem while solving tonight's. That final rule may be the most important. You can burn every piece of fuel now. Then breakfast suffers. You can dry boots too aggressively. Then the leather suffers. You can stay awake all night because you are worried about the herd. Then tomorrow's riding suffers. You can pile every blanket underneath you. Then your upper body suffers. Every resource is limited. Warmth, fuel, food, sleep, time, energy, attention. The successful system does not maximize any one of them. It balances them. The word survival can make this sound more dramatic than most nights probably were. Many cold nights were likely not desperate battles between life and death. They were simply hard. Men were uncomfortable. Sleep was broken. Hands hurt. Feet went numb. Coffee tasted unusually good. The fire seemed too small. The ground seemed too hard. Then morning came and everyone got up. That ordinary repetition is important. You do not need every night to become a disaster before cold weather skill matters. Skill often exists precisely to stop an unpleasant night from becoming a dangerous one. By now the eastern horizon is beginning to lighten. The cattle appear more clearly. The fire is mostly coals. Someone is already preparing breakfast. Your blanket smells heavily of smoke. Your clothes smell worse. Your shoulders ache. You slept in pieces. Yet you are functioning. That is the payoff. The night did not become warm. You made yourself warm enough inside it. The landscape did not become forgiving. You reduced what it could take from you. The work did not stop. The crew divided it. The cold did not disappear. You managed its effects one small problem at a time. And that is why cowboys endured freezing cattle drive nights. Not because they were immune to discomfort, because they were practiced at working inside it. Soon you will roll the blankets again. The fire will disappear under ash. The wagon will move. The herd will stretch northward. By tonight, you may be doing all of this again. But before that happens, there is one last thing to understand. If you strip away the paintings, the campfire songs, and the mythology, what did a cowboy actually do to make it through a freezing night? The answer is now almost complete. By now, the answer is no longer hidden in the fire. It is in everything around it. You know where to sleep. You know why the ground matters. You know why the wind matters. You know why dry blankets matter. You know why a small fire can be more useful than a large one. You know why food, fuel, clothing, watches, and judgment all belong to the same system. So imagine one more freezing night. The herd stops after a long day. Your legs are stiff when you dismount. The light is already fading. You do not simply drop where you stand. You look. Dry ground first. Some protection from wind if the landscape offers it. Close enough to the herd to respond. Far enough from hooves, traffic, and trouble. Close enough to the fire to use its heat. Far enough that sparks do not reach the bedroll easily. That first decision costs almost nothing. It saves heat for hours. Then comes the ground layer. Canvas, blankets, whatever useful material you have. You create distance between your body and cold soil. That matters because the earth beneath you is not going to warm simply because there is a fire several feet away. Your body presses downward. The bedding compresses. Heat tries to move into the colder ground. So you slow it. Then you build the layers above. Clothing stays on because clothing is already insulation. Coat closed. Hat pulled down. Blankets around the body. Edges tucked. Outer canvas helping with wind and moisture. The important thing is the pocket of warm air you create inside. Your body produces the heat. The bedding keeps more of it close. That is the central mechanism. The campfire adds to it. The flames warm the side facing them. The coals keep releasing heat after the bright flames fall. You turn through the night because radiant heat is uneven. One side warms. The other cools. You rotate. Adjust. Tuck the blanket again. The system is never completely still. Then there is fuel. If wood is plentiful, you have more freedom. If it is scarce, you burn carefully. You use available brush, dead wood, or other practical fuel. Where dried buffalo chips are available, they may replace timber. The point is not what looks proper. The point is what burns. And you save some, because supper is not the last need. There is the coldest part of the night. There is breakfast. There may be wet clothing to dry. A fire that consumes every piece of fuel before midnight has solved 1 hour by stealing from the next. So the fire remains controlled, useful, not theatrical. Then comes dryness. You protect bedding before it gets wet. You dry socks when you can. You warm boots carefully rather than damaging leather. You keep rain, frost, dew, and wet ground away from your insulating layers as much as possible. Because when moisture enters the system, everything becomes harder. Blankets grow heavy. Clothing feels colder. Drying consumes fuel. The margin shrinks. Then comes food. Beans, meat, bread or biscuits, coffee, whatever the outfit has available. The exact meal changes. The need does not. You are feeding a body that has spent hours riding, working, shivering, and producing heat. The fire warms the outside. Food supports the heat inside. Then, finally, you sleep. Except you do not simply sleep. You listen. The cattle breathe beyond camp. Someone rides the herd. Your turn may come later. When it does, you leave the bedroll. You leave the heat. You climb onto the horse and spend part of the night exposed again. That is why the system includes other people. Another rider watches while you rest. Then you watch while he rests. The cook maintains food and fire. The trail boss manages the larger movement. Each man depends on work done by someone else. The lone cowboy image is powerful. The cattle drive itself is cooperative. And if the weather becomes worse, cooperation matters even more. A restless herd may pull everyone from sleep. Rain may soak the outer layers. Wind may push the fire sideways. Sleet may stiffen clothing. Fuel may run low. Then the ordinary system is tested. What fails first? Perhaps dryness, perhaps sleep, perhaps the fire, perhaps the feeling in your fingers. The response is not to pretend the problem does not exist. You compensate, move behind shelter, protect the remaining dry bedding, save the coals, warm your hands before they become useless, shift the herd if exposure becomes too severe, help another rider, keep the animals calm, preserve what still works. That is the part modern mythology often misses. The cowboy does not survive by defeating nature. He survives by constantly yielding to facts. The wind is strong, so move. The ground is wet, so choose another patch. The blankets are damp, so dry them. Fuel is scarce, so use less. Your body is cold, so protect it. The herd is restless, so get up. There is no shame in any of those responses. They are the skill, and that is the full answer to how cowboys slept beside campfires during freezing cattle drives. They did not depend on the fire alone. They selected the least exposed ground they could reasonably use. They insulated themselves from the earth. They stayed in clothing and wrapped themselves in portable bedding. They protected those layers from moisture. They used canvas and terrain to reduce wind. They built controlled fires from whatever practical fuel the landscape provided. They ate enough to support hard work and body heat. They slept in fragments around rotating night watches. They corrected small problems before those problems became large ones. And when weather overwhelms the normal routine, they changed the routine. The limits were real. A weak fire could not compensate for soaked bedding. Blankets could not compensate forever for extreme exposure. Food could not replace sleep. Toughness could not create fuel. Experience could reduce risk, but it could not remove winter. Men still became exhausted. They still suffered cold hands and feet. They still endured bad nights. Severe weather could still become dangerous. The system worked because it created margin, not certainty. That may be the most important correction of all. When you picture a cowboy sleeping under the stars, you may imagine a man who needs almost nothing. A saddle, a blanket, a fire, an open sky. But look more closely, and you see the opposite. He needs many things: dry ground, good judgment, fuel, food, clothing, bedding, a horse, a crew, a quiet herd, time to sleep, and enough experience to make all of those limited resources work together. The frontier image becomes less magical. It also becomes more impressive. Because the achievement was never that these men did not feel cold, the achievement was that they understood how to remain functional inside it. Now the herd is quiet again. The last watch is nearly finished. No new problem needs solving. The fire has collapsed into a low red bed of coals. No one adds another log. There is no reason. Morning is close. The work of the night is ending. Your blankets are still wrapped around you. The canvas is stiff at the edges from cold. Your boots wait nearby. Your coat smells of smoke. Everything you needed has already done its job. Beyond the fire, the cattle are only dark shapes now. Their movement has slowed. The horses are quiet. The wind that kept finding openings in your bedding has weakened. You no longer need to turn toward the flames as often. There is barely enough heat coming from them to notice. And somehow, that feels fine. Because the warmth that matters now is already inside the blankets. You can feel your own breathing. Slow, steady. The ground underneath you is still cold, but it no longer feels hostile. It is simply there. The whole landscape is simply there. A trail, a herd, a wagon, a few tired men, a small fire almost finished with its work. Soon someone will rise. Coffee will be heated. Blankets will be rolled. Saddles will be tightened. The cattle will begin moving north again. But you do not need to go with them. Not tonight. You can leave them here. The cold prairie recedes. The fire becomes smaller. The sound of cattle becomes quieter. The hard ground belongs to another time. Around you now is a different room. A different bed. No night watch. No wet saddle. No fuel to gather. No cattle waiting in the dark. Nothing left to manage. Nothing left to understand. The cowboys found enough warmth to reach morning, and you already have more warmth than they could have imagined. So let the last coals fade. Let the trail disappear. Let the night become quiet. Sweet dreams.